For this final session of our third Widening the Pipeline Fellowship virtual training, we're privileged to have trainers and counselors from the International Women's Media Foundation. We're going to be working with us today in this last session to help us realize our own ability to handle stress, to deal with online harassment, and to cope with the pressures of our everyday work. We're joined today by Holly Pickett. She's a freelance photojournalist and journalist safety trainer based in New York City. And her professional experience spans 2 decades of covering stories about human migration, social movements, the cost of conflict, and the challenges faced by women. We're also joined today by Ana Zellhuber. She's a psychoanalyst and emergency psychology specialist. In 2005, she founded Vinland Solutions to provide psychological support to women journalists, human rights defenders, and women in politics who've been target of persecution or violence due to their gender or profession. And finally, we hope to be joined by Mari Galliser. She's a Brooklyn-based interdisciplinary technologist and co-founder of Signal Boost, which is a messaging application that provides encrypted broadcasts and hotlines for activists and grassroots organizers. So Ana and Holly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
We thought we could start this session because we've had a long day of intense conversations around the stresses and challenges that journalists face inside the newsroom and outside. And so Holly and Ana have decided that they're going to help us walk through an exercise that we journalists can use every day. I believe it's a mindfulness and sort of a way for us to breathe and be in place. So all of you on the line, let's learn from and listen to what Holly and Ana are going to share for us.
Okay. So I'm actually gonna share the slide. I'm really, really honored to be here with you today. We're gonna do a really quick breathing exercise. Everyone, if you're able, put one hand on your chest right here and the other hand on your belly, right below you can feel your rib cage is right in that space there. And we're gonna breathe in through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and breathe out for 4 counts. And we're gonna do 4 sets. And when you breathe in, you wanna breathe into your belly. So you should feel the hand that's on your belly expand when you breathe in and move down when you exhale. Okay, so is everybody ready? Here we go. So breathe in through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4, and out through the nose. 2, 3, 4. Again, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. This exercise, how does everybody feel after doing that?
Good.
So this has actually been studied. I can drop a couple of studies into the chat window, but it's not just relaxing. It's a physiological and psychological response. What slow diaphragmatic breathing does is it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is part of our nervous system that will help calm your body's stress response. So it's just, it's something that they've actually done research on. And of course, you know, you're going to supply your brain with oxygen for cognitive acuity, for attention, reasoning, decision-making. So, you know, you don't have to do it when you're in a stressful situation, but if you are in a stressful situation, it's something you can do really quickly. That's going to give you a minute, give you a little bit of a pause, an internal calm and clarity, and hopefully give you some oxygen. I don't know if anybody else, when you're stressed out, if you hold your breath. I do sometimes, and I'll notice it, and I'll say, oh, I need to breathe, and I'll take one of those deep diaphragmatic breaths, a really slow one, hold it and let it out. And it's just a very small thing that you can do. It also, of course, brings you into the present moment, and it increases your awareness of your body, your mind, and your surroundings. So it just brings you, it's one of the things that we can call a grounding exercise. So especially if you are exposed to a trauma or you know, just any kind of stress on the job or off the job, this is just a really simple but powerful tool that you can use. So
if I may,
yeah.
This exercise, I had been using it for years and years with journalists that had been through severe trauma, whether they were kidnapped or tortured, or they were watching something, for example, a war thing, things like that. And it has helped me help them stop the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, not sleeping, having almost hallucinations about the event because they are reliving it over and over and over. So it's a very, I say it's a beautiful technique because it has many advantages, as Holly just pointed out. Physically, it really changes you. It changes your physical condition. Also, it helps you make decisions. So whenever you have to make a quick decision, even if it sounds strange, breathe first, and you'll see that the outcome is going to be much better. And the other part of this exercise that is beautiful is that it takes 30 seconds, not more. And you can do it anywhere. You can do it standing up, you can do it laying down, you can do it sitting down, you can do it while you're in the car, you can do it when you're in a mass of people running, and you just breathe, focus on your surroundings, and then you act, because it's going to assure that the response that you have to that situation is going to be better. Of course, if there are shootings, you have to run fast, okay? But then you hide, and once you're hiding, then you breathe, and then you think about what you can do to be safe. So it's a breathing exercise that is very on the go, that you can always do. And I always suggest that, so that it will come naturally to you whenever you are in a stressful situation, try 1 week of doing it at least 3 times a day. Just 1 week, just 3 times a day. I mean, I'm talking about 3 minutes of your day. You can take that time for yourself. If you are blocking yourself when you're writing a note, breathe. And let's see what happens. It's going to be amazing for you to see how suddenly the screen gets lighter. It's more light in there, and you are again capable of putting your thoughts in order and writing again. So it's an exercise that you can try, and I do it every single day. I meditate and I do things like that, but I really, whenever there's a tough case that I'm working on, and they're telling me something that is hard to hear, I breathe, and then I can help that person go through that. you see? So try it. I always say that it works if you try it. If you don't try it, it doesn't work, for sure.
That's a good point. That brings me to my next question for both of you. And Holly, can I ask you to stop sharing the screen?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry about that.
Several of the people who've spoken today have said that they find it extremely challenging to practice self-care. And of course, we're trained to obviously respond to the moment.
Yes.
As I was told someone else last month, we were planning a training on the same day that the Roe versus Wade decision came through. And half the journalists had to run to the streets and start interviewing people and getting response stories. So I'll start with you, Holly. How do you sort of mesh the response, the way journalists are trained to be always hyper alert or ready for whatever, with this need to be in the moment, to relax, to slow things down?
The biggest thing for me is trying to maintain the awareness of how I'm feeling, and recognizing that it's natural. What I'm feeling is normal. So if I'm really stressed out, I can feel my heart pounding, and I can say to myself, yeah, that's okay. It's normal. This is a stressful situation. And you can kind of, if you're aware of how your body responds to those stressful situations, you can, I don't want to say you can totally step outside of it, but you can sort of recognize that your body is having a reaction and that it's okay. You're going to get through it. It might, it's going to be a little stressful, but like, you understand why it's happening. You're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, this is your body working the way it's supposed to. In stressful situations, this is part of our presentation, but in stressful situations, our body naturally reacts. And, it's a very old response that we have in our brains, that, we receive a signal that there's a threat or there's trauma or, something is threatening us, or we have to move quickly to avoid something. And so our body actually prepares us to fight or flight. And sometimes people also freeze, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be fight or flight. Sometimes people don't move and don't fight. And so that's another reaction that we can have, but your body is naturally preparing you to move quickly, to focus, to, your consciousness is being heightened. Your lung capacity expands. Your respiration is going to go up because you want more oxygen so that you can move. So all of these things are happening, and it's a natural response. And so then after kind of that acute stress has passed, sometimes our bodies go in the opposite direction. I don't know if any of you have ever had a very stressful day, and when you get home, you just are a puddle. You just kind of shut down. And that's kind of the body, the nervous system going in the other direction. And it's also part of the stress response. Okay. And so, normally we want to be right in the middle. We don't want to be on the really amped up. I mean, sometimes our nervous system gets us on the amped up side, and then can, also shut down completely and get us way over here on this side. So we want to be kind of in the middle. That's when we've kind of dealt with the stress and the trauma, or coped with it, we'll be right in that middle area between the two, between the extremes. So I don't know if that makes sense, but just for me, being aware of how my body responds in the moment, even in the moment, I can say, oh yeah, I understand why why I'm feeling anxious or my heart is pounding. It's my body responding to the situation.
Absolutely, it makes sense. And I think particularly for people like Luz, who works for the Austin American Statesman, and said that she's may have to go back to Uvalde and talk to families. I think understanding that you're going into a stressful situation and that you may have these challenges, and getting tips on how to deal with this is hopefully will be very helpful for her. But Ana, I want to shift to you now and ask you about the genesis of your work in terms of deciding that you wanted to provide this type of support specifically to women journalists and other people in in that realm. Tell us about why you wanted to do that.
Okay, just first, let me say that I agree totally with Holly. Consciousness makes a difference, consciousness of our own feelings and accepting them. And I will add two things, preparation and balance. Preparations in the sense of, if I'm going to go to make a note in a place that there can be violence, I have to prepare myself for that in many senses. And the other one is balance. There's always the night when you leave the work behind, or the day, depending on your shifts, and then give yourself at least 1 hour a day to relax, be in the present, and have something fun. Stop the news at that time. Don't watch anything sad. Watch something joyful. Watch, dance. Put music and dance at it while you're cooking. Do something fun for yourself 1 hour a day. I started this because first, long time ago, even longer than 2005, in 1997, the Mexican Red Cross asked me to open a project for free as a volunteer of the Red Cross for giving support to disasters, for victims of natural disasters. And it was a very successful project. The American Red Cross came to study it because it was really successful. And we end up working in the whole world. So we got in contact with the International Federation of the Red Cross and the International Committee of the Red Cross. And it was the International Committee who's in charge of the armed problems around the world, who asks me to give my first, me and my partner, to give our first workshop to Article 19, who, if you don't know them, it's a London-based organism that is dedicated for protection of journalists. They relocate them, they give them lawyers, they give them whatever they need to pull out of a very difficult and endangered situation. And when I saw the journalists in Mexico, that by that time they were being killed and they were being persecuted by the government then, we said we have to do something. So we talked to the people of Article 19 and we said, okay, we don't mind how much you're going to pay us. That cannot be an issue for helping these people. You can pay us whatever you can, but you're going to pay the first 12 sessions. And then if they want to keep on going on session, they're going to pay whatever they can. They're going to decide how much they're going to pay. That's how we started this project. And since then, well, we now work with, I think it's 16, 17 international organizations that are working for helping journalists, photojournalists, human rights defenders, women in politics, and also influencers and things like that. And the idea is the same. The organization pays whatever they can. It doesn't matter, okay? And the journalists, if they want to continue in therapy, if they need to continue in therapy, they pay whatever they can. And it goes really, for example, people in Cuba living there, they might pay us $3. It's okay, it's fine, it's the same as those in the UK who pays us, some of them. I have a patient that pays me £250 per session because she can afford it. So it doesn't matter. For us, it's exactly the same, you know? It's just that I think I have this urge to do something. That's why I don't watch news, sorry. But I have enough news from all my patients, okay? Because if I see something, I have the urge to do something. So I don't have so much time.
A good place for me to jump in because one of the things we've talked about today as well is the fact that journalism as it's practiced today, the threats or the stresses or stressors come from so many different angles.
Yes.
So let's talk about the issue of journalists dealing with online harassment.
Oh, yeah.
Have you had any clients lately who dealt with that, and what sort of support do you provide to them?
Yes, usually either if it's online or if it's in presence, the threats are real for the one who receives them. And I say are real for the one who receives them, because when we talk about cyberbullying, we have to understand that the person that uses that mean is because they don't have any power to really do harm. Most of the times, I'm not saying always, but most of the times they are, and I'm sorry if I'm going to express myself this way, but it doesn't mean to be mean. It's descriptive. Okay, I'm just making a description. It's tiny little people who feel they don't have any power for anything, who is angry and who is jealous and envious of those they attack. That's always the case. They're always envious because they feel so little. So they want to make the other one feel as little, you know? And so they threaten them, but they can do nothing really. I mean, yes, some of them can go really psychotic, really loony, and they can go haunt them and they can go do stuff. But it's the minority. Most of them are just going to be threatening online. But it feels as real, and as you cannot be certain that this person is not going to act on it, you're going to feel as frightened as you would if it was in a person. For example, the organized crimes has its own methods. I just had a case in which at the beginning they thought it was organized crime, but since he came to me and said, no, that's not organized crime, that's cyberbullying. And I was right. After a lot of, it was cyberbullying. And still, there's a chance for something to happen. So the way I help, it's different for those who are already safe. And we have the post-traumatic stress disorder sessions that are 9 to 20 at most. It's not psychoanalysis. They don't have to talk about their parents. They don't have to go in. I am a psychoanalyst, but I don't do that here. I do that with other patients. And in the case of those who are being threatened now, what we do is that we do things to keep them focused, to keep them calm enough to make decisions. That's the same as when they are being relocated to another country because the threat is so huge that they can be killed or the families can be killed. And what we do is to keep them try everything we in our means, and we are successful at that, for them to sleep, to eat regularly, to drink enough water, to make exercises for maintaining their levels of stress in a manageable. You don't take them away, because if your life is threatened, you have to be stressed, okay? Because of what Holly says, because you're gonna need that stress to act fast, but in a manageable way, so that they can really have their brains in a healthy situation to make good decisions. Sometimes the
I'm
stress.
going to stop you here only because
yes.
Mari has joined us, and I really want
perfect.
The next 20 minutes or so to have her join us. And thank you for being here, by the way. We would love to hear your tips and guidance about how to protect ourselves online.
Sure.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Mari. I'm coming here on behalf of the International Women's Media Foundation. And we do a lot of work as part of a program called Next Gen Safety Fellows to talk about holistic journalist safety, especially from people in journalism who are from underrepresented or marginalized backgrounds. So I have a little presentation that I actually give during what's called a HEFAT, a hostile first aid training, and it's an intro to digital security presentation. And I kind of shortened and condensed it for today's session. So let me just go ahead and start that presentation and share my screen. And just want to say, like, please feel free to interrupt me. I'll try to pause for questions, but if there's a term that you don't understand, or if I'm going too fast, or you just have questions in general, please don't hesitate to ask questions. So like I said, my name is Mari. My day job is actually work at a tech company called Cloudflare as a product manager for privacy products, trying to make the internet more private by default. And last year I was a safety training fellow with the IWMF, as I mentioned. So first I want to talk a little bit about my approach to digital safety and digital security, and it's called holistic security. What is holistic security? It's basically a philosophy that talks about digital security within the context of your overall safety. And these are some tenets about it that I pulled from a resource called Tactical, and a really great organization called Tactical Tech. And so holistic security is about fostering collaboration. It's also about realizing that security itself is a deeply subjective and personal topic. So what does that mean? People should define what security and well-being mean for themselves, and that they're experts in their own experiences and decisions in the face of structural, armed, domestic violence, and their own political, economic, social, legal, and environmental situations. And I want to emphasize that first point of fostering collaboration, because you all work in journalism, and journalism, I know, is a super collaborative environment, and also super research-based. And I know that all of you have expertise in your own domains. And I think when it comes to digital security and digital safety, you can use a lot of those research skills and a lot of those collaborative pieces of expertise to work together to better understand like what you need to do to keep each other safe. The other thing is that self-care and well-being are not selfish, but rather are subversive and political acts of self-preservation. And lastly, that security measures should always correspond to context analysis and be in response to concretely identified threats. So in the tech world, I know that a lot of things are really complicated and confusing. And I just want to make sure that you understand the context of what threats you should actually be worried about, because I know it can seem really overwhelming. But I think one of the best things to do in order for your digital safety and digital security not to be overwhelming is to figure out like what the context is of a certain type of threat that you might be worried about, and actually how relevant that might be to your work. So how do you actually do that? So I'm going to talk really briefly about an activity called threat modeling. And usually when I'm in person or doing like a longer workshop, we actually have an activity around threat modeling, but because I don't have time for that today, I'll just point you to this resource and talk a little bit about what threat modeling is about. So firstly, you want in a type of threat modeling activity, you want to identify what assets you have. This is kind of, you know, traditionally thinking about assets, you might think like, oh, what do I have like as an asset in my house? Like, is it my computer, my jewelry, whatever, the cash I have? So in that sense, you should think about the assets as the things within your everyday journalist activity that are very valuable to you. And that might be valuable to other folks. So examples of this are things like emails, contact lists, instant messages, locations, sources, information, sensitive files, things like that. And then, like I said, if you're thinking about, you know, some sort of like crime or some sort of threat that might affect you in the everyday world, you know, maybe you're worried about like some sort of like house robbery or something. Think about your adversaries in a similar way in the journalist world of like what potential types of folks might be interested in the assets that you have and like what motivates them. So examples of this could be a potential nefarious source, a former partner colleague, a government, or a hacker. And then you want to think, what are the consequences? So if your adversary were to actually get access to your emails or your contact lists or things like that, what are the consequences of that? Are they really high? Are they really devastating? Or are they, you know, or would it not be such a big deal? So that leads us to risk. Risk is basically the likelihood that the adversary will actually get access to your assets. So basically, what is the likelihood that a threat will occur? And I'm going through this because even though it seems pretty broad, when you think about your digital safety and digital security, when you think about like my Twitter account or the files that I have or the context that I have, I think this is really helpful for prioritizing what you should start working on first in order for your digital safety. The last thing is like, what is the capability of your adversary to carry out a threat? So maybe some Joe Schmo isn't going to be like a hacker, hack into your email or something. But if you're working in a field where the government, for example, might be really a government, I'm not saying like what type of government or which country's government might be interested in the assets that you have, they might have a lot more resources, right, to carry out some of these threats or kind of take on some of these assets. Like they might have a capacity to hire a personal investigator or someone with more technical capability. They might have legal capability, things like that. So when you're thinking about where do I even get started, identify what are your important assets, what are your adversaries, what are your threats, what is the risk that those adversaries will have access to those assets, and figure out what is the most high priority out of those things. Cool. And then so in response to this, the Electronic Frontier Foundation is an organization that has developed this kind of guide to your security plan from basically from this threat modeling activity that I just talked about. And if you're interested, you can visit the Surveillance Self-Defense website. It's ssd.eff.org and look at this, this kind of guide to figuring out your security plan. So the next thing I want to talk about super briefly is a lot of y'all have probably heard about encryption, and I want to go over some basics on encryption. So has anyone like heard of what encryption is or want to take a crack at what they think is the definition of encryption? Go for it. Wrong answers are great. Oops. Wait, how do I go back? Okay.
Like when you're just hiding your messages so that they're not readily available or visible to hackers, something like that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Anyone else?
Secure messaging that couldn't be traced to a single person, whether the person is receiving it or sending it by any sort of people such as law enforcement or any other agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that security part is really, really important. Anyone else have anything else to add?
I think encryption also means that the computer is going to change the language of the file so that if it falls in the wrong hand, they won't be able to read it really.
Yes, that's actually a great definition. I would say that language is a really good analogy for what encryption actually does, even though it's not technically another language. It's not like changing your language from English to, you know, Mandarin or something. It basically looks like that. So basically the definition that I pulled here is encryption is a way to conceal information by altering it so that it appears to be random data. So instead of changing it into a language, right, it's just random data that only a computer can decrypt or recognize. And the effect of that, right, is that the encryption happens in a way that the plain text, like what I have here on the left, is encrypted to a way that only the intended recipient can view what the plain text was. So this is just an arrow showing just generally what happens when you encrypt something. It turns into random mumbo jumbo, but that random mumbo jumbo is only something that where you sent it, the correctly intended recipient can actually reverse that to make it readable again. And then there's two other concepts that I want to go over really quickly. And one is that there's something called encrypting at rest and encrypting in transit. So there's encrypting stuff on your device. These are things that are really static. So this is like the contact list on your device or the files on your computer. These are things that when I say at rest, like you can think about it, oh, like these are little pieces of information sleeping on my phone or computer. And then encryption in transit is stuff that goes over the internet network. So these are things like when the message gets sent onto the internet, when you make a request to a website, when you're chatting with someone like online, when you think of things online, that's the type of encryption in transit. So why is this distinction important? Well, because there's different ways to encrypt data at rest versus in transit. So why would you encrypt data when it's just laying around in your computer? Basically, when your information is lying around on your computer or your phone, it's not directly viewable by someone, but it is possible that someone could obtain access to your device, right? This could happen because you accidentally lose your phone or your laptop. It could happen because someone seizes it or something. So one way to protect against that type of threat is to do something called enabling full disk encryption. So I've included some instructions on how to do that. So on your iPhone, I believe it's already on by default if you have a passcode. On Android, I think it's also enabled by default, but it's good to just check. I think what's more important is that sometimes it's not enabled on your computer. So on a Mac, you want to go into your preferences and go into something called your file vault and make that turned on. And on Windows, you go to your device encryption settings. And essentially what this means is that unless you have the password to that device, none of the files or none of the data on it is viewable. So that's why it's really important to create a good and strong password for any of your devices and make sure that this full disk encryption is turned on, because it means that if your device is seized by anyone that you wouldn't want to have access to, that they wouldn't be able to see any of the files or the sensitive data on it. Basically, what about encrypting your data on the internet? Basically, when you're sending a message on your phone, it can go through a lot of different places as it gets to its destination, right? Like the internet exists all over the world, and at every part of that destination, someone could potentially be spying or peeking into those messages. So I'll jump ahead a little bit, but one of the best ways to make sure that your browsing data, for example, is encrypted is to always make sure that you're visiting websites using HTTPS. So that makes sure that the connection that you're making and the things that you're doing on that website are private to just you and the person operating or the organization operating that website. The second way is to use a VPN. So this makes your connection basically private to you and the VPN operator, and that makes your traffic look like it's coming from the VPN itself, not your actual device. So when you're connecting to a VPN, say I'm using something like NordVPN, I'm creating a private connection to NordVPN and then visiting the website that I'm looking at through NordVPN servers. So this will make you look like you're coming from the VPN services IP address and like their service. However, it's important to note that the VPN operator will be able to see the websites that you're visiting. And so that's why it's important to like look into and research the VPN operator that you're using to make sure that they have a history towards respecting journalist privacy and things like that. And then the last way to make sure your connections are encrypted while you're browsing the internet is to use Tor. So basically what Tor does is it wraps your traffic or your request in 3 layers of encryption so that no one basically hop in where it goes in the internet knows who you are or where you're going. Tor is great. It's not just for use on the dark web. It's definitely one of the most privacy preserving ways that you can do research. So I highly recommend using it. It's one of the most vetted and I guess most well respected within the digital security space ways. And how you can do so is just to go on the Tor website at tor.org and download their browser. Cool. And then lastly, what about encrypted communication for like messaging apps and emails and stuff? The app that I recommend using, and that's been vetted and that is open source, meaning that their code can be audited by security experts, is Signal. And Signal has a lot of really amazing built-in privacy features. Being from the journalism world, I know that probably a lot of y'all are familiar with Signal, but if you haven't downloaded it yet, I would recommend checking it out. And that's because Signal doesn't actually retain any metadata besides your phone number. So the only thing that the Signal service sees is the phone number and the last time you connected to the service. They are not able to see any of your messages, your contacts, like who you're talking to or anything like that. And also I really like the security features they have where it allows you to enable disappearing messages. WhatsApp is decently private and secure because it does also make the messages between the conversations secure and private between the people you're talking to on WhatsApp. However, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and that means that they are a little more permissive with what metadata that you expose to their service. So famously, people also download or allow WhatsApp permissions to make copies of messages to like iCloud and things like that. If you're worried about your privacy and security in that sense, I would disable that feature because that has enabled a lot of like breaches of information in the past. This is those iCloud backups. Basically, if you're privately messaging someone, but then also backing it up to an insecure iCloud account, or if someone gets access to that iCloud account, then they can see all your messages. And then also email and PGP. So if you want to send a secure and private email, I recommend setting up a PGP key. And the EFF has a guide to doing that. Another way to send private and secure email is to have both you as the sender and the recipient use a Proton Mail email address, which uses basically a built-in PGP key to make your conversation confidential. But if you're not doing any of that, I would not assume that your emails are confidential because it depends on the policy of the service operating your email, and then also the organization that has a contract with that service. Any questions on secure messaging, secure emailing, communication?
If there are, we can take one or two, but we're near the end of our formal recording for this discussion. But do any of the fellows have any particularly urgent questions to ask Mari while we have her here? I personally am extremely grateful for this opportunity for me to think about safety online, about how to navigate this space and to start taking it seriously, really. But I'm also grateful to all the members of the IWMF team for coming and talking with us about strategies for dealing with the stress and the pressures that we feel during the course of our work. So let's take this opportunity to thank Mari, Holly, and Ana for joining us on this final session of the third Widening the Pipeline virtual training. So thank you all so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all so much for the work that you do.
So please come back. We hope we'll see all the fellows for our next virtual training, which will be in September. And the theme will be investigative reporting. But for now, I hope you've all benefited as much as I have from this discussion of mental health, both in and outside of the newsroom. Thank you all.